In my last video, I analyzed Letta's character, and I think she can be viewed as a foil to Sir Ansbach. Both of these characters can be defined, at least in part, by their loyalty. They are both elite knights sworn to serve a demigod. He is a pure-blood knight sworn to the cause of Mohg, the Lord of Blood, while she is a needle knight of Mikola. Their loyalty to their respective demigods drives almost all of their decisions. And just like last time, we're not just talking about a little bit of loyalty here, we're talking absolute, total, lifelong service and dedication to the cause they have chosen. They are willing to do almost anything for that cause, willing to both kill and die for their chosen masters. In this way, they both fulfill the classic narrative archetype of the knight. Chivalry incarnate, duty above all else, honor at any cost. And yet, despite all of these similarities, in terms of actual personality, these characters are nearly total opposites. Because, as I discussed in my last video, Letta's loyalty is paired with this destructive element of paranoia. This combination of loyalty and paranoia results in her committing terrible sins, murder, butchery, and betrayal. On the other hand, I think the word that best describes Ansbach is decency. He is perhaps the most genuinely decent character From Software has ever written. He is virtuous almost to a fault. There are multiple points in his story when he really probably should become angry, but he just doesn't. He never really gets upset. He never loses control of his emotions. The only thing in the entire story that appears to truly vex him is the perceived humiliation and disrespect that is shown towards Mohg's corpse. Instead of being properly laid to rest with dignity, his master's body is being used as a vessel to resurrect Radahn's soul, so that Mikola can finally have his perfect promised consort. In a story filled with misery and suffering and betrayal and lies and manipulation, a million different reasons to be upset, this is the thing that finally stirs the gentle and patient Ansbach into violent motion. There is something about this act that Ansbach finds so offensive that he is willing to risk his life to put a stop to it. And not just risk his life, he makes it very clear that he believes he stands no chance in the final battle against Mikola. He is terrified of Mikola, and that is another surprising aspect of his character. He is almost ruled as much by his fear as he is by his sense of loyalty. But he overcomes that fear, overcomes his certainty of death, even if he knows he will fail, and chooses to fight anyway. All to put a stop to this disrespectful treatment of Mohg's corpse. Why? Why does this matter so much to him? Why is this the thing that finally stirs him to action? Well, as we are going to see, I think there are a couple of reasons. The first is that Ansbach feels like a failure, because he was unable to save Mohg from Mikola's enchantment in the first place, and he sees this final battle as a chance to redeem himself. The second is that Ansbach is a true knight who takes his service very seriously. He swore an oath to Mohg. He doesn't just get to throw that oath away because the Lord of Blood is dead. Mikola charmed Mohg, which turned him into little more than a slave to obsession. That is bad enough, but when Mohg is killed and finally freed from this enchantment, Mikola does not allow him to rest. He steals the body and uses it as a tool to resurrect Radahn. It is as if Mikola were throwing Mohg away like garbage to get a hold of the shiny, better toy he really wanted all along. The disrespect in that action is more than Ansbach can abide. His master deserved better. And for Ansbach, decency is something worth fighting for, even something worth dying for. And finally, I think Ansbach genuinely believes that opposing Mikola is the right thing to do. He believes that Mikola is a monster, that there is nothing more terrifying in all the world than the way Mikola forces obedience on his enemies. Ansbach is a character who chooses to stand beside the meek and the despised, like the Omen and the Tarnished, and who chooses to stand against the powerful, against the Golden Order, against Marika and her divine dominion, and eventually against Mikola too. which may be why he was serving Mohg in the first place, and that is another aspect of his character we need to discuss. As I mentioned in my video on Leda, who a knight chooses to pledge their loyalty to tells the audience a lot about their character, and Ansbach pledges his loyalty to Mohg, the Lord of Blood. And there is something kinda strange about that choice. See, the thing is, the story very much treats Mohg like a villain, which is unusual for a From Software game. Usually in these games, there are no true heroes or villains. The story treats everyone as morally gray and leaves it up to the audience to decide who was right or wrong. Like, even a character as seemingly despicable as the Dung Eater gets an ambiguous ending where it is suggested that maybe all of his cruelty was actually justified. But Mohg is different. The story is not kind to him or his ambitions. For example, the description of the Mohgwyn Palace map reads, "It is here Mohg, the Lord of Blood, is building his palace, to be the seat of his coming dynasty named Mohgwyn, and whatever nightmares that may bring." Here the game's narrator is explicitly telling the audience, Mohg's dynasty is going to be filled with nightmares. That is bad. Gideon Ofnir describes Mohg as a deluded maniac who is not even worth killing. Mohg is the leader of the Bloody Fingers, a group of blood-obsessed killers who betray and murder their fellow Tarnished. They can even ambush and attack our player character at multiple points in the game. The only other servant of Mohg we ever meet in the game is Vare, who is a total creep. I think Vare is another interesting foil to Ansbach, because Ansbach is so honorable and respectful and good, while Vare is an off-putting weirdo who seems to derive an almost sexual pleasure from the sight of pain and blood. How could these two characters possibly serve the same master? How could they be fighting on the same side? If you put all these pieces together, a very unflattering portrait of Mohg is formed. A blood-obsessed, deluded maniac who has made a pact with a dark god and leads a band of bloodthirsty killers and perverted weirdos. So when you meet Ansbach and he says he was once a knight of Mohg, the audience should immediately be put on their guard. Okay, so there's going to be something screwed up about this guy. He is going to turn out to be some kind of freak, just like Vare. And then the writers pull the rug out from under our feet and reveal that no, actually he is the most decent character in the whole story. He is practically a paragon of virtue, the total opposite of Vare. With this single character, our understanding of Mohg's story is completely transformed. If Mohg was able to inspire the loyalty of someone like Ansbach, well geez, there must be something about his cause that was decent and honorable and worth believing in once. Someday I will do a full video on Mohg and we can try to figure out what is going on with his character and how we can reconcile these disparate elements of his story. But for now, let's stay focused on Ansbach. Of course, Leda goes in the opposite direction. She is a knight of Mikola, the kind, the tender, the gentle. So you might expect her to be pretty cool, but nope. She turns out to be completely terrifying. She is a dangerous zealot and mass murderer, and that tells us something about Mikola's character too. In From Software games, appearances are deceiving. You can never be quite sure who you can really trust, which adds to the general vein of confusion and danger that runs through all of their stories. So what I want to do now is follow Ansbach's story from start to finish. Examine every line of dialogue, every appearance, every item description, in the same basic order as a player would naturally encounter them. And with every appearance, I will ask the question, what are the writers and developers revealing about his character here? Alright, let's start at the start with his first appearance in the story, at the base of Bellerot Tower. And just like with Leda, we will begin by examining his visual design. Ansbach's outfit is made up of a dark fabric, very worn and decayed. Just like Leda, his costume includes some elaborate ornamental patterns made up of golden threading. But unlike hers, the color of his is very faded. Notice how tattered the once golden tassels at the bottom of his surcoat are, or how dirty and stained his belt is. Ansbach has an appearance of faded glory, a fighter long past his prime, serving a cause already lost. lost. But the most striking aspect of his visual design is, of course, his iron helmet, which covers his entire face and includes a false white beard. It has an elaborate flowing molding, and the description of the helmet claims that it is meant to give him the appearance of being a quiet, wise old man, which I guess comes from the fake beard portion, but the iron portion of the helmet gives off a very different vibe. There is a sharpness and coldness to it. Look how angled the double eye slits are, which I think implies precision, like a bird of prey precisely hunting down its target. Sir Ansbach, for all his pretenses of being a harmless old man, is still a hunter, the former leader of Mohg's Blood Knights, which I think you can see in the design of his helmet. Next, let's see what he has to say for himself, and as always, as you listen to this opening dialogue, ask yourself, what do the developers and writers want you to think or feel about his character and why? Okay, here it is.
You must be the Tarnished. I am Ansbach, formerly in service to Lord Mohg, but now, like you, another soul guided by kindly Mikola. I'm hardly the steady hand I once was. My fighting days are far behind me, which is why I have chosen to dedicate myself to investigation, to discern tender Mikola's ultimate purpose. I'd rather not volunteer service to a new master unless I know that I can be of use. Righteous Tarnished, what brings you here?
I wanted to make sure I included that last little bit of dialogue at the end, when he addresses our character as Righteous Tarnished, because it reveals a lot about his personality. In most other circumstances, the writers portray the Tarnished as a despised class of people in the Lands Between. Margit the Fell refers to us as a foul Tarnished, smoldering with a meager flame. Godric the Grafted refers to us as a lowly Tarnished. Even Kenneth Haight, who is a shockingly tolerant character for being a noble of the infamously intolerant Golden Order, even he doesn't really like the Tarnished. When you offer him help, at first he's like, I don't know. And then he's like, well, I guess any help is appreciated, even if it is from a Tarnished. And if you attack Kenneth Haight, he very quickly changes his mind and cries out that you are a wretched Tarnished. The point of all this dialogue is to make it clear that, in this setting, the Tarnished are seen as scum. They are wretched, they are lowly, they are meager, no one likes them. Except, apparently, for Ansbach. In his eyes, we are righteous. Of course, Ansbach was a servant of Mohg, who was a member of a race known as the Omen, who are perhaps even more hated and abused by the denizens of the Lands Between than the Tarnished are. So Ansbach is someone sympathetic to the plight of the downtrodden and the despised. He is not a character who appears to bear any love at all for the Golden Order or its persecutions. Taking a look at the rest of his dialogue here, he does present himself to be a harmless old man. Hardly the steady hand I once was, my fighting days are behind me. Instead of a fighter, he declares himself to be an investigator, and this is his primary role during the early sections of the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion. He is trying to find an answer to the question, just what is kindly Mikola doing here? This begins a side quest in which the player can hunt down a series of crosses left behind by Mikola, each of which is a location where the demigod has divested himself of some piece of his own flesh, all in some kind of elaborate purification ritual. After finding each cross, the player can return to Ansbach and be rewarded with some new dialogue. We are not going to listen to any of this dialogue together because it does not reveal much new information about his character, but it is worth noting that it is Ansbach who first reveals that the summit of the tower contains a divine gateway, that this was the site where Marika ascended to godhood, and it is Ansbach who figures out that Mikola's true purpose here is to ascend to godhood at the same spot. Similar to Leda, this reveals that Ansbach is a character with access to hidden knowledge, privy to the secrets of the gods, and moreover, he is an intelligent character. He only requires limited information to piece together Mikola's true plans. Before we move on, there's one more piece of dialogue I want to play for you. If you attack Ansbach and then stop attacking him and speak to him, this is what he says.
What What on earth is the matter? Have you come to your senses? Now there's no need for any hand-wringing. The way the world is, I'd say it's a wonder people don't lash out more often.
I find this line of dialogue really delightful. As I mentioned earlier, Ansbach is a character who just does not get upset even when he probably should. If you attack him, he's just like, oh, don't worry about it. The way the world is, I'm only surprised people don't randomly try to murder me more often. He is a deeply forgiving character. He does not seem to bear any resentment towards anyone, no matter what they do to him, which makes it all the more surprising that the mistreatment of Mohg's corpse is the thing that finally ends up really upsetting him. Anyway, moving on to the next part of his story. We are going to fast forward to the moment when Miquella's charm breaks, and as you listen to this next bit of dialogue, try and see if you can figure out how his personality has changed now that the enchantment is no longer affecting him. Okay, here it is.
Kindly Miquella has discarded his great rune. The fog that vexed my aging faculties has been lifted, and follies better left forgotten haunt me once again. Once, in an attempt to free Lord Mohg from his enchantment, I challenged tender Miquella, only to have my own heart rather artfully stolen. I knew not how weak I was. I believed that with sufficient mastery, even an Empyrean would be within reach of my blade. I could not have been more mistaken. Miquella the Kind is a monster, pure and radiant. He wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying. Righteous tarnished, Miquella the Kind makes my blood run cold. I am loath to admit it, but even at this very instant I wish to run very far away indeed.
Something that is endlessly fascinating to me is trying to figure out exactly how Miquella's charm works, and it seems to affect every character slightly differently. In my last video, I discussed how it seemed that the charm washed away Letta's violent paranoia, leaving her a gentler and more trusting personality. Well, here, Ansbach describes the charm as a fog that vexed his aging faculties, and when the fog lifted, old memories returned to haunt him, which makes me wonder if Miquella has the ability to not exactly erase memories, but to make people forget. It seems like, while under the effects of the enchantment, Ansbach forgot that he once tried to kill Miquella. If this is true, it makes Miquella's power seem even more frightening. We actually get two very different descriptions of Ansbach's assassination attempt from two different characters. One here from Ansbach himself and another version later from Letta. Ansbach describes it as if he never stood a chance, that he was far too weak to defeat Miquella. Letta, on the other hand, remembers it very differently. She calls Ansbach the feared commander of the Pure Blood Knights, who cleaved Miquella open with his blood blade. From her description, it sounds like Ansbach did some very serious damage, that he managed to slice the demigod open, and was only stopped when Miquella was able to place him under that enchantment. From this difference in their description, it kind of seems like Ansbach is plagued by self-doubt. He rates his performance far lower than it actually was. This is surprising because all of the other evidence we have suggests that he is a very accomplished fighter. The description of his bow says that he possesses extraordinary dexterity. The description of his scythe states that he does not rely on trickery at all in battle, but only on well-honed skill. And the description of his incantation claims that he has a fearsome reputation on the battlefield. Another character, Freya, describes Ansbach as a breed apart, and talks about what an honor it would be to face him in battle. However, despite his very obvious abilities, Ansbach lacks confidence. Perhaps as a result of his age, or maybe as a result of his failure to free Mohg from Miquella's enchantment. And there is another element of his character revealed in this dialogue, his fear. Ansbach is afraid of Miquella, deeply, terribly afraid. This element of fear gets brought up again and again. It is even mentioned in the description of his helmet, that an old fear lurks underneath the visage of the quiet, wise old man. I think it is notable that these feelings of fear are only mentioned after Mikla's enchantment has been broken. I suspect that Ansbach's natural tendency towards fear was washed away by the charm, in the same way that it washed away Letta's natural tendency towards paranoia. In this dialogue, Ansbach is also the first and really only character who speaks to Mikla's true nature, that Mikla is not just a soft-hearted, gentle child, but something far more sinister. And yet he also continues to use language like pure and radiant, and still calls Mikla by his common epithet, the kind. So even in Ansbach's more sinister portrayal, Mikla remains a complex antagonist, both monstrous and beautiful, both terrifying and gentle. Moving forward, the next time we meet Ansbach is on the bottom floor of the Shadowkeep storeroom. There he is poring through old records, still investigating the mystery behind the question of, what are Mikla's true plans? In his previous dialogue, Ansbach made it very clear just how terrified he was, and how badly he wanted to turn tail and run away. So there must be some really compelling reason for him to not only stick around, but to delve even deeper into the dangerous depths of the realm of shadow. As we listen to his next dialogue, pay really close attention to what is motivating him here. Okay, here it is.
Righteous Tarnished. It's been some time. After unburdening my soul to you, I had hoped to make a fresh start, but there was one thought I could not dislodge from my mind. So, here I am, quite unable to move on. After Lord Moke's slaying at his dynastic palace, it appears his body has been absconded with, and taken straight to kind Mikla. Surely you recall that I once served Lord Moog as a pureblood knight, after failing him in every regard, and losing sight of my vows. I'd do anything to make amends, in whatever meager way I can. What could they possibly have in mind for Lord Moog's remains? The implications are rather unnerving.
This is the dialogue where Ansbach reveals his feelings of failure, that he failed Moog in, quote, every regard, and that he is seeking some way to make amends. In this dialogue, he also says that he had hoped to make a fresh start, meaning he wanted to leave to go make a new life for himself, far away from the terrifying Mikla, but he just could not force himself to go. There was something holding him back. He cannot leave until he finds out what is going to be done with his lord's body. If you explore the storeroom, you can eventually find an item called the Secret Right Scroll, which, according to its item description, explains the ritual Mikla is going to perform at the top of the tower. If you give this scroll to Ansbach, he will be deeply offended by what he learns. He calls it a humiliation and declares that his lord deserved better. And he refers to the whole plan as, quote, mere folly. And remember that word folly, because he's going to keep using it. We are going to listen to another section of his dialogue, and as you listen, ask yourself, what exactly is Ansbach referring to as folly, and why is it so upsetting to him? Okay, here it is.
Righteous Tarnished. You have my gratitude. You have given me the answers I needed, but I can hardly fathom it. Such folly, unto the end. I am a warrior, but I've aged. I cannot afford to act hastily. Curse it all. I know my limits. I could spend the rest of my life honing my craft, and still that creature would be out of my blade's reach. The absolute folly of it all.
Earlier, I talked about how patient and gentle Ansbach tends to be, with the one exception of Mikla's mistreatment of Moog's corpse. But this dialogue reveals that there is something more behind this anger. He also seems to be infuriated by the absolute folly of it all, By folly, he means foolishness, and I don't think he is only referring to Mikla's actions here. I think he is referring to himself too. Mikla is forcing him to do something foolish. As he says, he could spend the rest of his life honing his craft, and still he would not be strong enough to defeat Mikla. So his defiance will be a pointless act, but he still has to do it, because he is a knight and Mohg is his lord, and he cannot stand by and allow this humiliation to go unchallenged. The thing that angers him most of all is not Mikla, but himself. His own foolish loyalty, which will drive him to self-destruction. Before we reach that point of self-destruction, we have something else to discuss. Actually, two something elses. Because during his time in the storeroom, Ansbach's storyline intersects with those of two other characters. The first is Freya, who I mentioned earlier. She is another member of Mikla's little diverse band of charmed adventurers. Freya is a former champion of Radon, and she is also in the storeroom searching for answers. Unfortunately, she has more brawn than brains and cannot find those answers on her own, leaving her hopelessly muddled and incapable of moving forward. You can tell Ansbach about the nature of her plight, and if so, he will send her a letter explaining the situation. With this information in hand, Freya chooses to fight to defend Mikla at the top of the tower at the end of the story. What is important to our analysis of Ansbach's character here is the fact that he knows that giving Freya this information will turn her into his enemy. At this point in his story, he has already decided to challenge Mikla, and he already knows that he will have to fight his way through Leda and the rest of her allies to get there. It would be in his best interest to lie to Freya or just not help her at all, to make that fight easier. But Ansbach does not do that. He tells her the truth even knowing it will make his life more difficult, because he is a character who is not motivated by self-interest. He is committed to the truth and to doing the right thing even at his own expense. During this section of the story, he also intersects with Leda's questline. As I discussed in my previous video, after Mikla's enchantment is broken, Leda becomes overwhelmed by her own paranoia and begins ambushing and murdering her own allies, starting with a Hornsent. After the Hornsent is dealt with, she turns her attention to Sir Ansbach, who she correctly suspects of being disloyal to Mikla, though as I discussed in my previous video, she does not understand his motivations. She ambushes him in the storeroom, and you can choose to either help her kill Ansbach or choose to fight along his side. And either choice reveals something new about his character. If you side with Leda and attack Ansbach, he does not become angry or resentful. Instead, he says something to the effect of, "Oh, thank goodness Leda has an ally. She tends to overestimate what she can accomplish alone," which is a hilarious line because come on, man. We are trying to kill you. Like, dude, this is not the time to get excited that your murderer has made a new friend. And if you actually do kill Ansbach, this is what he says.
I have utterly failed you both, Mikla the Kind, Lord Mohg.
On his death, Ansbach does not just despair at failing Mohg, but at failing Mikla too, and this is shocking. Mikla is his enemy. Mikla brainwashed his lord. Mikla brainwashed him. And yet Ansbach still seems to feel some sense of loyalty towards Mikla. If you choose to fight by his side during this encounter, he actually chides you. He asks you if you've lost your wits fighting to defend some useless old man like him. And if he manages to defeat Leda, this is what he says.
Lady Leda, I ask you keep kindly Mikla in your care.
Once again, in this line, we see the absolute civility and decency that defines his character. This woman just tried to kill him. He should hate her, but he just doesn't seem to have any capacity for hatred in him. Instead, he speaks to her respectfully. He asks that she defend Mikla, the very demigod he plans to challenge. Moving on, we are going to skip right past the second confrontation with Leda at the top of the tower, because nothing really new is revealed about his character there. Instead, let's talk about what he says after that confrontation, right before the final battle against Mikola begins. We are not going to listen to this one together either, because I think we've already listened to too much dialogue in this video. Instead, I will just describe it to you. He says he cannot stop quivering in fear. Even after successfully defeating Leda and the others, the idea of challenging a god still terrifies him, which in the end only makes it all the more impressive that he manages to overcome that fear and take part in the final battle. This is what true courage looks like, facing the things that make you afraid head on without running away. And in this final meeting, you can choose to reveal to Ansbach that your character was the one who killed Mohg. As always, this does not make him upset. He says don't worry about it, he doesn't bear any grudge. He says it was an honorable duel. That's just part of the risk of seeking lordship, and he blames Mikola's enchantment more than anything. In the battle itself, he politely addresses Radahn, saying that he is happy to see him again, but that Mohg's body does not belong to him. He declares that he fights for the Lord of Blood's dignity. Ansbach cannot survive this battle. He is destined to meet his end at the summit of the tower, crossing blades with Mikola, who has now been reborn as a true god, far more powerful than he was at their last encounter. The one that so terribly shook Ansbach's confidence, that made his blood run cold, that made him want to run as far away as he could. Ansbach knew from the beginning that he would die here. This is what he was so afraid of all along, but he chooses to fight anyway, and when he does fall, we get one final piece of dialogue. And this one we have to listen to because it is a fantastic line. Here it is.
Righteous tarnished, become our new lord, a lord not for gods, but for men.
With his final breath, Ansbach asks the Tardish to become the next lord, not for gods, but for men. And I think this is what Ansbach was fighting for all along. This is why he was serving Mohg in the first place, to tear down the oppressive and unequal Golden Order and establish a new, more equitable order in its place. One where ordinary people can flourish, not just the mighty gods who rule over them. The great irony is that, in his madness, Mohg became more obsessed with establishing his own royal dynasty than with fighting actual injustice. And I think it is interesting to pair that final line of dialogue with the description of his armor, which reads, Ansbach understood that keeping his oath to his old master was not an act of logic, nor would it bear any justice, but it was for these very reasons he was unable to let go. To me, this is what defines true knighthood. Not fighting for logic, not fighting because it makes sense, but because he must. Honor and dignity demand it, even if it is foolish. That second line, Ansbach understood it would not bear any justice, means that he knows this will not make things right. The injustice that has been done to Mohg, the enchantment that twisted his mind, can never be undone. But that is why he has to fight, because no one else will. He is the only one who can defend Mohg's dignity. That is what makes Ansbach a true knight, because he chooses to face his fears, to fight against the impossible, a mere mortal who challenged a god, not because he thinks there is any true chance of victory, but because it was the right thing to do.